And thanks to you at home for joining us this hour. I am Ari Melber, in for Rachel, who has the night off. Now, we're reporting several big stories right now, including a financial turning point in the trial of Paul Manafort. Today is the day Mueller's prosecutors brought out Manafort's own bookkeeper, who told the jury he kept his foreign bank accounts secret from her. And that could be crucial to the case because it goes towards the criminal intent prosecutors allege that Manafort had throughout these tricky transactions. Now, we have legal experts who were there inside the courtroom to explain tonight. There's also a breaking news story about how an alleged Russian spy burrowed inside the U.S. Embassy in Moscow. So we have both of those developing stories tonight. But we begin with some new flares that are coming from Donald Trump's own national security aides about the risks that continue to be posed from President Trump's one-on-one meeting with Vladimir Putin in Helsinki. Now, that was just 3 weeks ago. And according to experts across the spectrum, it marked a low point in a presidency with many low points that relate to Russia. Now, experts inside Trump's own administration also say this is a problem. Indeed, it was Trump's own intelligence chief who took this extraordinary step of publicly noting that Trump was hiding what happened in the meeting from him. That was an admission that upset the White House. It was made under questioning by NBC's Andrea Mitchell at a security conference.
In Helsinki, the president was alone with Vladimir Putin for 2 hours, more than 2 hours, with only translators. Basically, how do you know what happened? You were on the dark side of the moon. How do you have any idea what happened in that meeting?
Well, you're right. I don't know what happened in that meeting. If you had asked me how that ought to be conducted, I would have suggested a different way. But that's not my role. That's not my job. So it is what it is.
Is there a risk that Vladimir Putin could have recorded it?
That risk is always there.
People who run intelligence agencies do have all sorts of legit ways to duck those questions. They can say they won't discuss private deliberations with the president. They can say they won't discuss classified information, and certainly part of that meeting would be classified. But note that instead, Coates sent a signal that whatever went down, he was out of the loop. And if what went down was bad or even nefarious, he's on the record that he was out of the loop. Now, perhaps he also hoped to nudge his boss towards bringing him into the loop. It is hard to run the intelligence agency's quest for information around the whole world if you can't get basic info from down the hall. But here's what's new tonight. We are learning officially that Coates still doesn't know what went down, which makes the history even more concerning, since what we do know is that Trump partially walked back his support for Putin in Helsinki, but then he canceled a lot of that out by saying that Russian election interference didn't happen. Of course, that's still Putin's position. Then the bureaucrats got in on the action. You remember they had an actual National Security Council meeting on election security, which would be a good thing. But reporters noted that entire summit was less than an hour and didn't have any public follow-through or policy announcements. And that matches reporting that the Trump administration has no central strategy for election security and no one's in charge. And while we're running through the facts tonight, note that another Trump appointee flagged how they don't have a key person, quote, minding the store on cybersecurity because the Trump administration eliminated the job of cybersecurity coordinator. So that's a lot of facts. That is the current policy baseline. Experts noting the Trump approach here looks more like maybe cyber lackadaisical than cyber secure. That is the framework for what happened today. A list of intelligence VIPs marching into the White House briefing room. And you can see it right there. They were rolling deep. You see the leaders of Intel, NSA, FBI, Homeland Security announcing that contrary to what their boss says, the recent reports in the news of Russian midterm meddling are true, that Russian interference in U.S. politics continues right now, and they say this administration is working to protect the midterms, and their boss does care about it. Now, if there is a silver lining here to that group of people you saw, and we're going to play some of what they said, the silver lining is these intelligence professionals are trying to show a united front and correct their own president, while also trying not to enrage him, as he certainly watched their televised performance. But as Jerry Garcia pointed out long ago, every silver lining has a touch of gray, and that came as reporters asked the logical question about the contradiction between the message in that room and Trump's message in Helsinki.
Let me take you back, if I could, to Helsinki. The president seemed to indicate that he may believe Vladimir Putin when he says he didn't have any influence in the 2016 election. What is your belief about the Russian government involvement in meddling in 2016?
Well, in relationship to the 2016 election, of course, none of us were in office at that particular time, but both the president, the vice president, I think everyone on this stage has acknowledged the fact that the ICA was a correct assessment of what happened in 2016. Our focus here today is simply to tell the American people we acknowledge the threat. It is real, it is continuing, and we're doing everything we can to have a legitimate election that the American people can have trust in.
So that was the answer. That's the tension on the intelligence. Then there's a separate tension about how do you investigate, indict, and punish the people identified by that very intelligence for attacking American democracy. We all know now there's a busy special counsel operation that Trump has denigrated and at times lied about. So a question on that was posed to the FBI director, who, let's of course not forget, has this job because his predecessor was fired because of the same Russia probe, and that firing is now part of the obstruction inquiry.
I have a question for Director Wray. Thank you. The special counsel, Robert Mueller, has indicted more than 20 Russian officials based on work by the FBI for meddling in the 2016 election. Now, the president has tweeted that investigation by the special counsel is a hoax and should be shut down. I know you've said that you don't believe it is a hoax, but why would the American people believe what you're saying about the FBI when the president says that the investigation by the special counsel is a hoax, and when the press secretary yesterday said that there was a lot of corruption within the FBI? Do you have any response to those statements coming from the White House?
Well, I can assure the American people that the men and women of the FBI, starting from the director all the way on down, are going to follow our oaths and do our jobs.
Strong question. The answer is up in the air. That's a statement that could mean something. That oath that he references is to the Constitution, not the president. And in our history, there are certainly officials who took their oaths to mean that they had to stand up to criminal conduct when discovered by their peers or superiors. But let's be clear, Director Wray's statement also could mean nothing because it's leaning on a cliche rather than stating unequivocally today that the FBI director still has Mueller's back, has his own agents back, and isn't going to change his actions or his words just because the president down the hall keeps running down the probe. Now, there's one more insight we think we can probably glean from today's events, and it came also from Intel Chief Dan Coats, the one who chose to tell everyone before that Trump was hiding the Putin meeting's contents from him, which, again, isn't something he has to put on blast in front of the nation. But he did it again today, putting on the record that this was not an issue of timing or delay or sitting down with his boss. It's been 3 weeks, and your nation's top intelligence officials still doesn't know what happened in Helsinki.
In the run-up to the Helsinki summit, U.S. officials, ambassadors to NATO, ambassadors to Russia, said that the president would raise the issue of malign activity with President Putin. But he didn't discuss that, at least at the press conference. You're saying today that the president has directed you to make the issue of election meddling a priority. How do you explain the disconnect between what you are saying, his advisors, and what the president has said about this issue?
I'm not in a position to either understand fully or talk about what happened at Helsinki.
He's not in a position, meaning he still doesn't know. There's an old Brooklyn saying about that moment of insight that hits you when you learn a truth. If you don't know, now you know. Well, under Trump, Dan Coats has turned that upside down, telling everyone he didn't know, and he still doesn't. He is the one person in charge of our U.S. national security secrets. If he still doesn't know, that sounds like a problem for all of us. We begin tonight with Ken Delaney, an intelligence and national security reporter for NBC News that has been a part of a great deal of reporting and some scoops on this subject. Thank you for joining me tonight.
Thank you, Ari. Good to be here.
When you look at that united front, what do you see as the positive and what do you see as problematic that was clearly left unsaid?
That was such a fascinating mixture of truth and fiction, of cynicism and earnestness right before us at that news conference. The fiction and the cynicism was National Security Advisor John Bolton coming out and trying to suggest that from the moment Donald Trump Trump took office, he has had a strong and forceful policy to counter foreign election intervention and Russian meddling. That's just false. We've reported that it's false. Anyone who has a Twitter feed or who reads Donald Trump on Twitter knows that that's not true. What he's done is undermine at every turn the conclusion of the intelligence community that Russia interfered. Even tonight, hours after this event, Donald Trump gave a speech in Wilkes-Barre, and he again referred to the Russia hoax. He said that his relationship with Putin could be good, but it's hindered by the Russian hoax. So that part of it was ridiculous. But, you know, Chris Wray, Paul Nakasone, who's the head of the National Security Agency, and Dan Coats, I really believe do have an interest in trying to do something, and they did want to communicate to the American people that the government does recognize that this is a problem. They're trying to flag that the Russians are still out there intervening, and there are some things that they are doing about it. And the most interesting thing that I heard was Paul Nakasone, who's a general and who commands Cyber Command, which is, you know, the nation's cyber war force, said that he was prepared to go after foreign meddlers in our election. And he seemed to suggest that he had presidential authorization to do that. I think that's actually up in the air. We need to pin that down because he actually can't use the vast cyber arsenal at his disposal unless Donald Trump allows him to do that. But that was the biggest news, I thought, that came out of what many of those people said. Other things that they said, we already knew. Yes, the Russians continue to meddle in our politics. Yes, DHS is reaching out to the states to try to shore up cybersecurity. Yes, the FBI has a foreign influence task force, and they are trying to step up their efforts. And no, there is no presidential leadership. The president wasn't there. There's no central unifying force that knits this stuff together.
Let's dig into that point you raise, because it's common to say this is better than nothing. And you hear that a lot in Washington, where a lot of times nothing is what's going on. That's a low bar for the Trump administration. So while better than nothing, as you say, without the president there, doesn't it still look like the cybersecurity plan is a sort of a headless body where these various agency folks do what they can, but we all know and see that the head of the government is undercutting them before and after?
Yes, and the biggest evidence of that is that they're having this news conference 100 days before the midterms. It's about a year and a half too late, because none of this behavior by the Russians stopped at all after the 2016 election, particularly the intervention on Facebook and Twitter, the attempt to sort of divide Americans by creating false personas and stirring up trouble. That's been going on. And Dan Coats gave a speech a couple of weeks ago where he said the system is blinking red. And so, yes, you're absolutely right, because we can shore up our cyber defenses and we can do a lot of different things to try to defend. But the Russian intelligence hackers are always going to get in some fashion. And the way that you stop them is to deter them, to make them pay a price. And the only person that can do that is Donald Trump. Those other people at that news conference can't do that.
Just briefly to that final point, because you've reported on this, one of the issues with the Obama administration and the perils that are posed even if someone tries to take it seriously was, quote, Obama's approach, the Washington Post noted, seemed reducible to the imperative, don't make things worse. Obama and his advisors concerned any pre-election response could provoke an escalation from Putin. Putting aside the Trump piece of this, what is the problem for the U.S. that, as you've put it, lives in a glass house when it comes to escalating a global war?
Yep, that was a reasonable concern by Barack Obama, because we are the most vulnerable of any society. We are the most internet connected, and we are extremely vulnerable to Russian cyber attack, and they are in our networks, including our critical infrastructure. But, you know, most intelligence officials and experts that I talk to feel like, what else can we do? There has to be a response to this. We are wide open right now to an attack on our democracy, and the Russians have not been deterred in the least, and there's got to be something that we can do to deter them. All right.
NBC's Ken Delaney, and thank you so much all over this story.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.